Why Oracle is cutting up to 30,000 jobs, the anatomy of an ERP project failure, and why your business and IT operations are in conflict. Those are just a few of the topics we'll cover here in episode 260 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 260. This is the tech agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, ERP, AI, and other technology projects. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And we're also part of Lander Talent, which is a staffing company that helps companies staff their ERP and IT projects. Joining me, as always, is our co-host, Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited for another episode.
Yes, me too. Excited for some good conversation here. We've got some social media questions we're going to dive into, some audience questions we've gotten from social media. We're going to dive into a couple newsworthy topics that are really interesting. One is Oracle may cut up to 30,000 jobs, so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about Microsoft's bet on AI and how that's causing some jitters in the industry. And then later in the show, we'll have our guest, Fred Hessler, on the show. He's the director of the Expert Witness Practice here at Third Stage Consulting. He's going to be on the show talking about ERP project failures and lawsuits, and we're going to unpack those failures and lawsuits and understand what some of the common patterns and trends are in those types of projects. And then later in the show, we'll talk about how your business operations and internal IT are typically in conflict and what you can do to resolve the conflict and the conflict of priorities between your business and IT groups as it relates to your digital transformation. So we'll cover that later in the show. But before we get to all of that, what are some of the social media questions we've received recently, Darian?
Yeah, a couple good questions today. This first one is, where do you fit alignment with customer project members, especially key users, that often present resistance and lobby for change orders to adjust new software to old versions of a software, doing more or less the same thing, but a bit more modern? Does that make sense?
Yeah, maybe, trying to stick to the old legacy processes and trying to basically force new technology to do the old ways of operating. That's a common dynamic and something we commonly see with clients. Is a common point of resistance. It's a point of project delays and overruns too, commonly. But having said that, there's going to be times where it is appropriate to potentially customize or change the software because it doesn't do what you need it to do as a business. But the key is to understand the difference between the must-haves and the things you really do need to change in the software versus things that you as a business could change to adapt to the software. And it's not either or. It's usually not just one answer. It oftentimes depends on which part of the business you're talking about and what function you're talking about. But typically it's a mix of both in projects. A lot of times you can set aside some of the requests for customization because they are things that maybe you don't need to change, or you could just accept the way the software works if you're willing to. But then there's other things that commonly will be showstoppers, things that you have to have these things in order for your business to function. And those are two different things. And usually there's a mix of both. And so I think the easy answer for vendors and IT people oftentimes is just use the software the way it was built and don't change the software. But the reality of a business leader oftentimes is, well, I need the business to do, or I need the software to do certain things. And so that's what we'll get into later in the show too, when we talk about, in the last segment, when we talk about that conflict between business and IT priorities. IT simplicity oftentimes leads to business complexity and vice versa. So that's the conflict that needs to be resolved. And that's where strong leadership comes into play, and how leaders need to help drive those decisions and that alignment. And a lot of times what we found is very effective in being a alignment tool for that purpose is to define the future state processes, take the time early in the project, not in the design and build phase of the project, but early before you get into the full implementation, start to map out what those future state processes are going to be and work through some of those decisions and conflicting priorities internally, work through that messiness early, get the clarity, and then start to move into the technical implementation. But what ends up happening is a lot of times those things don't surface until the technical implementers are already in there trying to build the software, at which point that's what slows things down at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some great points there. Our next question today is, in ERP projects, delegating transformation is a major issue. Does top management even know what to expect, or are they going in with the idea that a vendor sold them?
Well, too often it's the latter. Too often it's that leaders are going in with what vendors sold them rather than a view of reality. And so those misaligned, unrealistic expectations that leaders oftentimes have is oftentimes a direct result of the vendors telling them or selling them this unrealistic picture. But also, the reason it's such an effective sales tactic for vendors is because they're good at telling leaders what they want to hear. And what they want to hear is this isn't going to be that bad. It's pretty low risk. It's predictable. It's not going to cost that much money. It's going to improve the business. It's not going to be disruptive to your business, all that stuff. I mean, those are the things that we all want to hear and we hope is true. But as the saying goes, hope is not a strategy. And hoping that those things don't happen is not reality. So I think, it's hard for us sometimes as independent advisors, because sometimes we're telling clients what they don't want to hear. And it's almost like they can't accept that reality. And so they, sometimes they just don't want to hear what we have to say because it's not what anyone wants to hear. But if you want the truth and reality, then that is what you should be hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, some great questions today, but I want to switch gears and get into the first newsworthy article, which is about Microsoft and how their AI push is creating market and enterprise anxiety. So this article explores how Microsoft's aggressive bet on AI, especially Copilot and embedded AI across its ecosystem, is creating uncertainty for both investors and enterprise customers. While the vision is ambitious, many organizations are uneasy about cost, control, data exposure, and unclear ROI. Microsoft is rapidly embedding AI into core products like Microsoft 365, Azure Dynamics, and security tools, often tying AI capabilities to higher licensing tiers. According to the article, enterprises are struggling with predictable pricing models, questions around data usage, and how much real productivity value AI will deliver versus hype. The pace of change is also pressuring CIOs to make decisions before governance, skills, and policies are fully in place. This article highlights a growing gap between AI strategy and AI readiness. Microsoft is moving faster than many enterprises can absorb, forcing organizations to confront cost transparency, vendor dependence, data governance, and long-term architectural implications sooner than expected. With all of this, Eric, at what point does AI innovation become vendor pressure rather than a thing that is of value to customers?
Good question. I think the AI pressure is real, and even though it's there's a fair amount of business value potential with AI, it is being driven very aggressively by vendors, regardless of business value, because it gives vendors a reason to lock people in, to their ecosystem or their platform, and it also gives them pricing leverage. The more I can get a customer to use AI, and especially if we're talking agentic AI, then the more I can charge for the software. And so over time, I think that's where the real escalations are going to kick in with cloud software, is with AI agents and other usage of data and transacting and all that stuff is going to, the power and the computing cost associated with AI is going to force vendors to raise prices on their software longer term. So I think it's, we're just seeing the early stages of adoption where prices are somewhat low, but I think over time, these vendors are going to have to make money on all these big AI investments, and they're going to have to charge more. So I think that is bad news for customers, in that the costs are just going to go up, but it could be okay in the long term if the business value is there. So I think that's the key, is to just not bite off more than you can chew, and have a clear, deliberate purpose for what you're trying to get out of AI, just like you would do with any technology. I mean, it's no different than what I would say about a big ERP or a CRM or any other sort of technology initiative, just have a clear purpose of what you're trying to accomplish and clear parameters for what you expect and how you're going to manage the project and the overall ROI.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, what governance gaps are most organizations underestimating with enterprise AI right now, you think?
Just having clearly defined business processes for how AI is going to fit into your operations. I think it's such an early, nascent, emerging technology that a lot of companies are piloting and testing and just trying to innovate with AI, which is fine. That's okay. That's how you oftentimes can drive adoption. But with that comes a loss of control and a loss of clear direction as it relates to AI. So I think one of the biggest things you could do is just have clear purpose and a clear roadmap for what you want your processes to look like and how you envision AI fitting into that, rather than indefinitely just allowing people to experiment and try AI however they want to use it, because it's just like any tool, it can be, I don't want to say it can be dangerous, but it can be highly ineffective to just use it without any clear purpose or business value.
Yeah, absolutely. The roadmap is definitely super important. Last question on this. Does embedding AI deeply into core platforms increase long-term vendor lock-in?
It does, and it can. And that's why, I'm always a fan of looking at, or at least considering, non-ERP vendor AI options. So if you're implementing, in this example, you were talking about the Microsoft ecosystem. If you're implementing Microsoft, it's easy just to use Copilot and to use, Azure and other aspects of the Microsoft ecosystem, even outside of AI. It's easier. It's nice to have one-stop shop for all your technology needs and functionality, but it does create lock into to where it becomes harder to switch later on if and when you do decide that platform is no longer a good fit for you. Because you think about, even right now, even in a perfect world where, let's just say, you have a software or technology that is close to a perfect fit for your operations as it stands right now, over time, it's inevitable that's going to drift apart, because the software is going to change a certain way, your business is going to change a certain way, and they're not necessarily going to move, side by side in the evolution of the two things. And that's just normal. That's just a normal phenomena. So you have to plan for that and think, okay, what's going to happen in 10 or 20 years when that happens, and it comes time for me to do the next big digital transformation or ERP project? How hard is it going to be when I'm this locked in or this committed to one vendor? Now, the vendors like it because it makes the switching cost higher. It makes their revenue more predictable and more stable. But for you as a customer, that may not be a good thing. So I think you do have to think about that long-term vendor lock risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to, I know earlier you mentioned how these vendors are heavily investing in AI. This leads nicely into our next article of the day, which is about how Oracle may cut up to 30,000 jobs to fund an AI data center expansion. So this article reports that Oracle is considering large-scale job cuts, potentially up to 30,000 roles, to free up capital for massive AI data center investments as traditional banking financing for these projects pulls back. Oracle is aggressively shifting capital toward AI infrastructure, including GPU-heavy data centers needed to compete with hyperscalers. According to the article, rising costs, tighter credit conditions, and reduced bank appetite for large AI loans are forcing Oracle to self-fund expansion. Workforce reductions become a leveler to redact cash toward AI growth. Overall, the key takeaway from this article is that this signals a major reallocation of resources inside large enterprise software vendors. AI investment is increasingly coming at the expense of headcount and legacy business units, reinforcing that AI strategy is not additive, it can be cannibalistic. Eric, with all of this, what does it say about AI economics if even Oracle needs to lay off to fund growth at this point?
Well, first of all, 30,000 people, that's a huge number, even by Oracle standards. I mean, I don't know what percentage of their workforce that is, but I've got to think it's well into the double-digit percentage-wise. But what I wonder with this is what that means for the rest of the non-AI Oracle technology world. I mean, are they cutting back investments in other technologies, or did they have that much bloat or that much overhead? I can't imagine that's just overhead that was going to get cut eventually anyway. So it makes me wonder, what technology, in addition to the people that are impacted, which is a big deal, what technologies impacted? Are they going to sunset or discontinue certain technologies to justify getting rid of 30,000 people, or what? That's the bigger question I have. So I think it does go to show just the size and scale of investment that these companies are having to make in building that infrastructure, which is why, it's not sustainable long term. Someone's going to have to pay for this, and it's either going to come in the form of job losses and or increased costs to customers, or some combination of both. So I think that's unfortunately the two not so positive scenarios that are a potential cost of this whole AI movement that we're experiencing now.
For sure. And with that, do you think that could this increase risk for organizations that are dependent on Oracle support and expertise right now?
It could, yeah. I mean, especially if they are cutting back on certain technologies, or redirecting, not just, again, they may not just be cutting bodies or headcount. They may be cutting actual technologies and platforms and things that Oracle does. Like, would this affect their core database business? That's how they started as a company. So are they going to stop doing so much in the world of databases, or are they going to throttle back on their Oracle Fusion investments? Where's that money, or where's that lessened headcount going to impact the rest of the Oracle ecosystem? And that's a big unknown for me at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And last question with this, do you think that this accelerate consolidation among or do you think this does accelerate consolidation among enterprise software vendors?
Yes, I think it could, but I think it's also pointing to a broader battle, over infrastructure and AI platforms. I mean, I don't know that these could all possibly survive profitably in the long term. So, being so relatively late to the game, I know it's still early, but in the grand scheme of things, compared to Microsoft and OpenAI and some of the other, even Google and some of these other big tech companies that have already invested very heavily in AI, it does make you wonder: is Oracle too late? Are they playing catch up at this point? And I guess the market will determine that soon enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, super interesting article for sure, and interesting how they kind of tied together as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So really interesting stuff, and appreciate those newsworthy topics.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I'm super excited to get into today's conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to bring on Fred Hessler. He's a director of our expert witness practice here at Third Stage Consulting. He's going to be on the show talking about some of his lessons and experiences as an expert witness in analyzing failures and lawsuits. So we'll talk about some of those takeaways and things that you can do to avoid some of those common failures and lawsuits. And then later in the show, we'll talk about the conflict between your internal business and your internal IT departments, and how to prioritize and how to reconcile that potential competing priorities, set of competing priorities that those two groups have. So stay tuned. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control. If you're leading a digital transformation or ERP initiative and you want to avoid the costly mistakes that most organizations make, that's where Third Stage Consulting comes in. We are an independent and technology advisory firm, meaning that we don't sell software, we don't take commissions from vendors. Our only job is to protect your interests and be on your side. We help executives and project teams plan, deliver, and recover digital transformations and ERP projects, reducing risk, improving adoption, and delivering real business value. If you want clarity before you commit to your digital strategy, or if something feels off track to you, feel free to reach out to us at thirdstage-consulting.com, and my team and I would be happy to help.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Sometimes all I think about is you. Late nights in the middle of June. He waves been faking me out. Can't make you happier now. Sometimes all I think about is you.
Hello, welcome back to episode number 260 of Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com, and the show is produced by Major Tom Productions, sponsored by Third Stage Consulting. So if you'd like to learn more about how Third Stage can help with your consulting or your staffing needs, please feel free to reach out. We can be happy to chat with you about your project and how we might be able to help you out. We are excited for our next guest. Fred Hessler is a director of expert witness here at Third Stage Consulting. He gets inside all the gory details of some of the world's highest profile lawsuits as the leader of our expert witness practice. And he's going to be on the show talking about what causes failure and what are some of the lessons that he's seen in the failures and lawsuits he's been involved with. So all that being said, Fred, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. Hi, Eric. How you doing today?
Good to have you here. And you've been on our podcast in the past. You've been on. You were on the last time you were on this podcast. We were on talking about the SAAQ implementation failure in Canada. We did a little case study on that. That's not a client of ours, but it was a publicly documented case study that we unpacked a bit. And so you have some experience having this conversation on this podcast, but we've never really just focused on in general what causes these failures and what are some of the big lessons from being an expert witness. Before we jump in with some of the questions that I've got for you and that the audience has for you, tell us a little bit about your background, and then I want to get into what exactly an expert witness is.
Sure. I've been in information technology, enterprise software, since 1985 in various roles. And I've been in consulting since the early 90s with a lot of different systems integrators and product companies of local up to international scope. And a lot of different roles in that time, from sales to practice leadership to software development, project management, business analysis, recruiting, all sorts of jobs. And I joined Third Stage almost 4 years ago now. And since doing that, I've focused a lot of my time on litigation support activities, expert witness. And I found that the number of jobs that I've had in different roles I've had in the industry do help as good preparation for that. You understand everybody's perspective in one of these difficult situations.
Yeah, and as we'll see and unpack here in a moment, it's usually not just one person's fault or one party's fault. Usually there's a lot of blame and fault to go around in these sorts of projects. So tell us a little bit about, first of all, what is an expert witness? What does an expert witness do, and why do you like it? I know you're really passionate about this sort of thing. So just to help people understand what it is and what intrigues you about the role.
And the role of an expert witness from a legal perspective is very simple. It's to make difficult, complex, or technical information comprehensible to the court. That's really the role. And typically you're hired by one party and there's another witness expert hired by the other party to try to make that case for your client comprehensible. And why do I like it? I guess I just like the analysis of it. I like trying to unpack exactly what happened. And as you mentioned, it's never just one thing. It's usually a lot of things that have led to this unfortunate position where there's litigation or arbitration underway. And I just kind of like getting to the bottom of that.
Yeah. It also seems like one thing I've noticed about expert witness that I personally enjoy, and I'm curious to see what you think, is that, when you're actually doing an implementation, there's just so much chaos and noise and pressure and moving parts. And it's just a lot to keep up with. That a lot of times it's hard to lift your head up and stop and think and stop and look around and understand, what's really happening here. But with expert witness work, you have the luxury of being on the outside looking in. You're not caught up in the politics and the emotions and the personal nature of some of the implementations. Have you found that to be true too? It's almost like you can use that part of your brain. You can actually settle into that analytical part of your brain that sometimes you miss out on when you're actually in an implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. It requires focus and kind of calm to do the analysis. It's highly focused work, but even reading, email transcripts from inside a project or status reports, it can evoke those memories of chaos and stress and so forth from projects you've been involved in. Obviously, you couldn't do this kind of work without a pretty deep background in software development and implementation over the years. And actually, that's one of our strengths at Third Stage, I think, in doing this sort of work, is that we're not just an expert witness firm or litigation support. In fact, that's a minority of the business we do. We're ERP advisory consultants. And so we remain active in the industry and see current technology trends and trends in the industry generally. And I think that strengthens us as witnesses.
Yeah. Having that actual real life, real time track record and experience to draw from, for sure. Want to say hello to some audience members that have commented where they're joining from today. ZDAX PR on YouTube says hi. Thanks for being here today. Saliga Abrahams joining from Cape Town, South Africa. Thanks for being here today. Ronak from Columbus, Ohio. Thanks for being here today. And love to hear where else everyone else is joining from today. And any questions you have for Fred or I as it relates to expert witness engagements, lessons from failure, your own experiences with challenges and project issues. Love to hear your feedback as we go here. Just to get started, Fred, as we dive into this here, what is if you had to, I know this is probably unfair to start off with such a narrow-minded question, but I'll ask it anyway. But when you look at some of the highest profile ERP failures that you've been involved with, what's the most single common root cause that you think executives consistently underestimate or ignore? If you had to pick one, what would it be?
If I had to pick one, I guess it would be that client executives tend to too frequently ignore just how consuming these projects are to their organization, how much of the organization's attention and energy is going to be required to actually participate in. This isn't a spectator sport. You as a client are going to be deeply involved. There's expressing requirements. There's your testing responsibilities, your responsibility to make decisions quickly and help resolve issues quickly. Data conversion is a huge responsibility that I think a lot of client organizations don't anticipate having to be involved in. So I think that's the biggest single cause of failure, if I had to pick one. But there's another side to it too. I don't think that integrators in our business do a very good job generally of helping their clients prepare to do those things. They're not things clients do every day. And I don't think as an industry we do a very good job these days in helping clients be successful at fulfilling their parts of their obligations under these contracts.
Yeah. It seems like also the definition of success and failure could vary depending on if you're a system integrator or a customer. I don't know if you've seen that too, where it's like SI or system integrator or a vendor might think, I succeeded. I implemented software on, maybe it was even on time, on budget.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean it was successful to the client and their end result operations. Do you see that sort of disconnect too in terms of goal alignment or vision of what success actually is?
Yeah, that's a pretty common pattern. It's not in every case. Sometimes the causes of the dispute are more technical or they may have other motivations. But a pretty common theme is a mismatch of expectations around requirements. I have very particular functionality that's definitional to how I work. I need it to be done well, and you're not really listening to me, right? Or you're sort of hand waving it away and saying, how hard could that be? And so that's a pretty common pattern that'll eventually emerge as the real cause of the dispute.
Yeah, I love to. You and I being somewhat similar ages here, you could probably relate to this or remember this, but you remember like the Windows 98 rollout back in the day and how that was at the time such a big deal. And I think a lot of executives still think back to like, oh, remember the Windows 98 upgrade? It wasn't that difficult. So how hard could an SAP or a D365 project be, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. And I think a lot of times organizations just don't, to your point, they don't understand that it's not just a Windows 98 or a simple IT upgrade. It's a massive overhaul of your operations, which a lot of people underestimate.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that integrators sometimes don't spend the time to really understand business requirements that are critical or maybe even idiosyncratic to the client organization. And that leads to these misunderstandings as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Want to say hello to Hicham, joining from Casablanca, Morocco. I've never been, but I've heard it's beautiful there. I'd love to go sometime. Thank you for being here. And then Hicham follows up with keep up the great insights. Thank you for that. Hello to Nining on LinkedIn, joining from Indonesia. And then here's a cool name. I don't know why I like this name so much. Bobby Fisher. It's got a nice ring.
Yes, player.
Yeah. Bobby Fisher on YouTube says, having no capacity for assigned and released key users is a major issue again and again on all relevant functions. What do you think of that? Is that something?
Oh yeah, that's almost universal. That problem that Bobby's bringing up. We talk about this a lot. In fact, if I think about what advice we tend to give organizations who are embarking on one of these journeys, one of the ones we've really learned to stress is to be honest with yourself about what the organization's capacity for actually undertaking this project is. You've got key people you're going to need involved in the project. And the reason they're key people is because they're really good operationally too, right? So you're going to miss them if you take them out of operations. And that striking that balance is really critical and difficult to make. And a lot of businesses underestimate that. As I said earlier, they underestimate the degree of energy commitment they're going to need to make to one of these projects. So yeah, that happens a lot. It's a key source of failure from the client side, I found, is failure to uphold the obligations. And that usually means their participation in key functions with their key people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very, very important for sure. Darian on LinkedIn says, good morning. Good morning, Darian. We know her. We know Darian. She's on our team, so thanks for being here today. And then Sevi on LinkedIn says, great point, Eric. It's an overhaul of business operations, not just a simple IT upgrade. So thanks for being here today, Sevi. So when you look at these projects that end up in lawsuits, Fred, what usually turns a struggling implementation into a catastrophic, unrecoverable failure? In other words, it doesn't just happen overnight. These failures,
right?
You don't wake up one day and realize, oh, there's a failure. I have a failure on my hands. It's a slow, steady burn oftentimes. But is there a tipping point or something that sort of causes it to cross over into that this is a complete disaster, we're going to end up in litigation sort of phase?
Yeah, I don't think it's a single event, but yeah, there's a tipping point somewhere. I think it's not stopping it soon enough. There's a point in troubled projects where the right thing to do is stop, right, and recalibrate it, and that could be either party saying, "I don't feel comfortable. Let's stop this." We frequently see cases where clients would have been well advised to throw a flag and stop the project and recalibrate it because they're feeling uncomfortable, almost always for very good reasons. They don't do it. Customers tend to defer to the expertise of the integrator. They tend to place a lot of trust and faith in the integrator's expertise. And they sometimes wait till it's too late to say, I don't think this is going right. It's not the way expected. But we've seen cases also where the integrator really should have stopped the project, right, to recalibrate it. And, all of us who have worked in consulting know that's very difficult for integrators to do. There's always pressure on the project team from the management to keep the revenue flowing, right, wrap this up so we can move on to the next project and so on. And pausing a project interrupts that. It puts people on the bench. It's very operationally inconvenient and financially difficult to do it. But I think I've definitely seen cases where it would have been much less painful ultimately for the integrator to do that than suffer the pain that results from trying to muscle through a project that's going very poorly, where the connection with the customer just isn't happening. We've seen situations where the customer just flatly isn't ready for this, can't participate sufficiently. We've seen cases where very arguably the wrong product has been selected to be implemented. Your chances as an integrator to succeed in those situations is pretty low. And we spend a lot of our time at Third Stage telling clients about what red flags to watch out for and how to conduct. But there are definitely red flags for integrators too.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point. And it seems like even before you get to the point of potentially pausing a project or knowing when to pause the project, a lot of times it starts at the very beginning of the project. And we see this a lot because a lot of the work we do is vendor evaluation, selection. We help with digital strategy and planning, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So a lot of times we're side by side with a client when this dynamic happens. But oftentimes what happens is the vendor will say, hey, all right, you signed the contract. Great. We've got a team of people that's ready to show up tomorrow. Yeah, they're going to start implementing tomorrow. And you look around and you think, okay, I'm nowhere close to being ready for this, but they're putting all this pressure on me to get started tomorrow. And of course, they'll use sales tactics like, okay, you want the A team's available now. They're not going to be available.
Right.
They're available tomorrow. And, and so you end up falling into this trap of, okay, well, I guess if we get started, we go fast, we'll get it done sooner, we'll save money, et cetera, et cetera. What often ends up happening is you prematurely staff the project. You're wasting time and money early on without having a plan, and it creates a lot of problems later on. But to your point, that there's like a conflict of interest there. The vendor is interested in pushing faster. Your interest or self-interest would be to slow things down, get a proper plan, make sure you've got your own team mobilized, make sure you've got an overarching plan for how you're going to manage the SI, all that stuff. Do you see that being a root cause, or kind of even earlier than before what you're talking about, pausing the project?
Yeah, we've certainly seen those sales tactics that you're talking about. We've got the best people available, but they won't be this afternoon. So you better sign now and get started. We've seen tactics like that. We've seen tactics like that employed about stopping projects too. I recognize we have some issues here, but if you pause this project, I can't guarantee you're going to get your team back, right? And that's, frankly, having worked in consulting firms, that's just not true. They're going to work with you and you're going to get that team back. And actually, if things are going that poorly, it's not clear to me why you want that team back. Maybe better off. But to be fair, we've also seen situations where clients have kind of dug their own grave in this regard. They've put the pressure on the integrator to get started quickly. They haven't done their own due diligence. They signed contracts after very little analysis or exploration of what the product that they're choosing is, and they've set themselves up for failure.
Right. Yeah. Very true. And I think that's the harsh reality of some of these projects is, to your point earlier about how there's usually not just one party to blame.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you if you're an implementing organization, not that it's all your fault, but you are the person that has the most control over the project. And that's I suppose the irony of it all is a lot of companies don't act like they do, but the reality is you and your leadership team and overall organization are the ones that can affect change and improvements. But a lot of times you just defer, it's almost like you follow to a fault. You follow the lead of the vendors and they take you down a technology driven path that isn't necessarily business oriented and good for your business longer term.
Yeah, absolutely. As the client, you really have your hand on the spigot. And you've got to control that. There's absolutely a strong tendency to defer to the expertise of the integrator.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to say hello to a few more people joining here on the stream. We've got Sanjay joining on LinkedIn. Thanks for being here today. Lynette joining from Chester, Virginia. Thank you for being here today. We have Tunke joining from Izmir, Turkey. And follow-up question here from Sanjay, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, your knee-jerk reaction to this, Fred. This is a juicy question here from Sanjay on LinkedIn. What lessons do big companies like SAP learn from high-profile ERP lawsuits, or do they learn anything from them? I guess would be a better question.
They probably learn how to write their contracts more tightly.
Actually, a good point. I don't think you're kidding, are you? You're actually serious.
No, guys, I don't know. What do you think? I'm not sure. I'm not having been in one of those organizations. I'm really not sure if they learn any lessons in terms of how they actually conduct projects. What do you think?
Well, I actually, even though you were half kidding, I think that is probably the biggest lesson is what you said is writing the contracts better. I mean, because they've got to mitigate their risk, and I don't think behaviorally they change anything because that economic self-interest, if you think about it, think about a company like SAP, and it's not just SAP, it's Microsoft, it's Oracle, it's all these big vendors. They have so much to gain by pushing people to cloud upgrades and to push the services side of things with their partners. And the more adoption they can drive, that's the appeal. If there's an occasional lawsuit here and there, I don't know that that's enough to cause them to say, you know what, maybe we should rethink the way we operate. I think what's happening, I would take it one step further and say, not only are they not learning from it, but I think what's happening, and you're starting to see this in the EU and even with some litigation here in the US around anti-competitive behavior, potentially, or allegations of anti-competitive behavior. There's EU investigation into antitrust, anti-competitive behavior on the part of SAP. Celonis is suing SAP for anti-competitive behavior with their blocking out of their technologies and the business process mining side of things. So I think what's happening is that you're starting to see regulation, and I think regulators will end up having to set the guardrails and to teach the vendors a lesson. I don't think the vendors are going to learn on their own, just because there's the allure of cloud subscriptions and all that stuff is just too great. You look at SAP stock price too. I mean, it's through the roof because they're doing a good job selling cloud adoption, even though some would say they could be doing better, but they are driving a lot of S/4HANA adoption, which investors love. It drives up the stock price, and that's their myopic focus. I don't think they're too worried about, are we going to get sued here and there? It's no different than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. They've been getting sued the whole time and they haven't changed. So I don't know why that would change now.
And I was 3/4 serious about the contract comment. Actually, one of the things that we advise customers on a lot is that you really need to understand that contract. There are aspects of it that are particularly important to understand. They're not written for your benefit, right? As a client, they're written for the software vendor's benefit. And there's some things in there that are negotiable and some things that are not. But the things that are not, at least things to be aware of and understand what you're getting into. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Bobby Fisher, I'm going to keep saying the name because I like it so much. Bobby Fisher on YouTube says, keeping parallel data worlds, especially using Excel available ERP functions, is a huge risk. Organizations should block Excel for some weeks after transition. I would say I see the point here. I agree, but I think the root cause of why people revert back to Excel and work outside the system after an implementation is largely because sometimes the software doesn't fit the needs of the business. Sometimes they haven't been trained appropriately. So there's usually a deeper issue than just they're using Excel or they're reverting back to their legacy processes. That's usually a symptom of something deeper. Is that what you've seen as well?
Yeah. I think you're right. I think it tends to be a failure of change management, but even before that, it tends to be a failure of requirements management. It seems that recently a tendency, I believe to be true, is that integrators don't do a very good job, put appropriate attention into understanding both the physical and logical models of the current operating environments of the customer. And they're ill-equipped to help the customer imagine different ways of working where they can accomplish really the spirit of the process and not just the letter of the process inside the new software. I don't think as an industry we do a very good job of that anymore. And I think that leads to this reversion to Excel habits. There are probably some people who are stubborn and just want to use these tools, but I found that's the definite minority of the cases. They're doing that because there's a thing they need to do they can't do in the software. And you're right, the cause of that is way back earlier in the project.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the key with a lot of these failures too, and the lawsuits, is really getting at, you've got a ton of symptoms. Like you can point to all these things that are lurking on the surface, but then if you dig below it, a lot of times you can narrow it down to a few core things that are being done wrong. Like you mentioned, change management or lack thereof. A lot of times that lack of change management leads to things like this dynamic here, where people are reverting back to legacy systems. Oftentimes another symptom that people don't often correlate is customization. We end up customizing the software because change hasn't been managed effectively. So that's it can be a form of resistance to change. It could also be that the software sucks or the software doesn't fit your needs, but it could also be that your people are partially resisting change and they just aren't open to new ways of operating. So I think getting to that root cause and attacking that is more effective than chasing the symptoms.
There's a complex dynamic that we've seen unfold in some cases, and it starts off with this. The vendor says, you're going to do fit to standard. And the customer says, we want to do that. We want to minimize customization. We really do. And in order to really do that, you need to help folks at the staff level understand how they're going to get their jobs done in the new system. And as I said earlier, how to accomplish not just the letter of the process, but the spirit of the process and get the work done. It's on you to understand that current process so you can help them reimagine it and therefore adopt it. as I said, I think as an industry, we do that very poorly these days. We show up and say, tell us your requirements. Do you have them written down? We'll just take the documents and go away, right? It's not as much conversation as there should be, and collaboration. What then happens is you really get into compelling a customer to adopt a fit to standard approach. And the folks that actually do the work in the organization say, this doesn't work. This is inadequate. And the reaction to that is probably some amount of period of mutual frustration. But eventually what I've seen is the implementation teams frequently throw up their hands and say, okay, we'll start customizing things and reproducing the old physical processes you had. And that doesn't lead anywhere good either. Then you wind up, you don't get any benefit of potentially improving or streamlining work processes. You're just redoing the old ones in a different technology, and you've blown up your goal of minimizing customization. It's a dynamic we've seen play out a few times in consulting engagements.
Yeah, it's very true, and then that creates somewhat of a domino effect downstream too.
Yep.
Lynette agrees. Whoops. There we go. Lynette on LinkedIn agrees. I agree. Writing better contracts is a lesson from the vendors. I'm here with Fred Hessler. We're talking about the anatomy of ERP project failures. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
When the soul of the city was laid to rest, and the night's forgotten.
If you're about to embark on the jungle of digital transformation, check out my new book, Welcome to the Jungle. It's a book that just came out in late 2025. It's my second book, and it's a book that focuses on digital transformation failure case studies and talks about the lessons and takeaways from that. It's 300 pages packed of all the lessons and things that I've learned from having been an expert witness in lawsuits related to digital transformations, and also with our team helping clients recover some of their failed projects. I've included as many lessons I could possibly fit into one book here. You can read this book. You can order it anywhere in the world in hard copy format, which is this format here. You can get it in paperback. You can also get it electronically as well. Scan the QR code right here or go to the links below for your copy. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 260. My name is Eric Kimberling, here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com, and the show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, produced by Major Tom Productions. If you'd like to learn more about how Third Stage can help you in your project, please feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. And if you'd like to learn more about how you could collaborate with us on this podcast and other content we produce, feel free to reach out to Major Tom Productions. I've included contact information below as well. So we're here with Fred Hessler. We're talking about the anatomy of ERP project failures. Let's jump back into the conversation. Another comment here from Lynette on LinkedIn. Lynette says, I've seen effectiveness with incorporating readiness language in the RFP and contract to make sure the organization also has the resources to proceed and the implementer maintains relevant, skilled resources for effective project management and outcomes. Otherwise, pause to ensure readiness across all fronts. So that's a good point.
Is it really a lot of good points packed into that comment? Actually, I've seen readiness language in some vendor contracts, some integrator contracts that are very clear about outlining responsibilities of the client organization, even imposing fines for idle time. If their unreadiness causes a delay. Some integrators' contracts are pretty terrible and they don't have anything like that in them, but I've seen some good ones where they have those customer expectations set out very clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be a good way to address it for sure. Here's a comment from ZDAX PR on YouTube. It says, hello again, Denise here. I was AFK for a while. I'm not sure what that means. I was AFK for a while. You guys just talked about vendors. Has the market solved the chronic problem of vendor lock-in? And has it gotten any better?
No.
It's gotten worse, I would say.
It's gotten worse. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, vendor lock, just for those that don't know, it's basically when the switching cost is so prohibitive that you're, for lack of a better word, you're stuck with that vendor long-term, whether you like it or not. And I think that's, it is something that not enough companies are looking at right now. I think this is going to create a wave of problems, and good news, bad news for people like you and I, Fred. I think it's going to create a lot of opportunity for us as expert witnesses in the future, in that you're going to get companies from this current generation of cloud upgrades 10 years from now, whatever it is, they're going to realize, okay, we've outgrown the system, or the technology is not a good fit as it once was. It's time for us to switch systems again, which every company does switch systems every couple decades, perhaps. But I think that difficulty of switching from these cloud platforms is going to be super difficult for companies that we haven't even seen I don't think we've even really started to see the long-term implications of that yet. But
right.
What are your thoughts there?
I think that's a really good point, that we haven't really begun to see the long-term implications of that. It's a relatively new phenomenon. And, we've seen recently, kind of anecdotally, but with some of our clients, situations where the incumbent vendor is absolutely using the difficulty of moving away from them to put the screws to the client, and in terms of increasing renewal fees and so on. In an obvious way, you'd think if you wanted to keep a customer long-term, you try to be easy to do business with, but we've seen some situations where they're obviously taking advantage when counting on the fact that it's very difficult to migrate away from an enterprise system.
Yeah. And I think, as leaders, again, getting back to those of you listening that are not working for a consulting firm, you work for the internal, you work for the client, the end client, or you are the end client. As leaders, it's our responsibility to not only address today's problems, but to maximize our flexibility long-term and keep options open for our organization long-term. I think the more you double down and lock yourself into one platform, even if it seems like a great idea today, stuff changes so quickly. I mean, the technology is going to change. Your business is going to change. It's inevitable that over time, there's going to be a drift between what the technology can do and what your business needs are. And that's why companies every 10 or 20 years go through these big, massive ERP implementations, because things get misaligned over time. It's not a bad thing. It's just the reality of changing organizations. But I think as leaders, though, you've got to keep your options open and ensure that you're not locking yourself or backing yourself into a corner longer term.
Yeah. And to the point about understanding the contract, at least in key provisions of it, I always say that, very few people enjoy reading contracts as much as we do, but still there are some provisions you've really got to understand. And the subscription model is very different, of course, from old style software purchase agreements that were essentially one-time license fee payments with occasional upgrade fees, right? When new versions came out and so on. Now it's consistent, and your ability to exit the agreement is exceedingly limited. Absent some sort of breach that you can point to, and that requires a lot of work to get to that point. there are typically no termination for convenience provisions in these agreements. You're stuck for the term. At minimum, you're going to wind up, if you want to leave the agreement, you're going to wind up paying your monthly subscription fee for the remainder of the agreement. Worse, future payments may accelerate and be immediately due. Right. So it's best you can get some pricing discounts by agreeing to longer term contracts, but you have to consider, is it worth it? If you go and you sign a 20-year contract, I'm exaggerating, of course, nobody does that, but signing a 5-year agreement to get an extra couple percentage points may not be worth it in terms of the lack of flexibility you're going to have if your business does change.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And there's a term called optionality that some industry analysts refer to as in terms of just, what gives you the most flexibility and options. I think, we were talking about SAP a moment ago, and it's I suppose it's easier to pick on SAP because they take this idea to an extreme, but SAP takes a very myopic SAP only approach to their customers. And that's why the EU is investigating them for antitrust behavior, and Celonis is suing them for blocking their technology from working with SAP. And that's SAP's MO. And I think, for them, it's a good thing because it locks, if I can get you locked into a long-term subscription with S/4HANA or whatever ERP software I provide, that's just recurring revenue, annual recurring revenue that investors are going to love. And it's going to drive up my stock price. As a leader within a software vendor, I'm getting comped very heavily on how much I can lock you in. So everyone's making money and everyone's doing well with the idea of vendor lock, except for the customers. And I think that's where I think we're going to see a lot more litigation in the
I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, I meant to mention this before, but for those of you that are interested, we have a new guide that we just released on our website. It's a ERP recovery guide, a project recovery guide. So you don't necessarily have to be in a unmitigated failure or lawsuit to benefit from this guide, but it's a way to identify risk in your project and to right size it. So if you have the sense that maybe things aren't going as well as they could possibly go, or you feel like there's opportunities to improve, which most projects do have opportunities to improve the pace at which they're going, check out this ERP recovery guide. You can just scan the QR code. I'll drop a link in the comments as well with that, but I'll leave it out there for your downloading pleasure and reading pleasure. So be sure to check that out. I also want to say hello to Dennis is joining from LinkedIn, joining from ERPfunnel.com in India. Hello, thanks for being here today. Lynette says readiness or lack thereof is a challenge with these projects, and I think we've touched on that a bit here in the conversation so far. But here's a question from Darian on LinkedIn, and this builds on a comment you made earlier, Fred. Just want to get your thoughts here. At what point does a client's failure to pause or recalibrate become part of the problem?
Well, if you look at it from the standpoint of litigation, starting at that extreme example, if there's litigation, the failure to pause to recalibrate works against the customer's interests for sure. It's very easy for opposing counsel to say, well, look, you kept paying the bills.
Yeah.
You didn't object in a way the contract demands that you object. You just let it happen. And you're in a position then as a customer of saying, well, we trusted these guys. We hired them because they're experts. And that's kind of a weak position to be in. So when you get to litigation or arbitration, having refrained from throwing a red flag and stopping the project does not help you. You're not going to get credit from opposing counsel for your patience with the performance of the integrator. Not sure if that's what Darian had in mind, but
yeah, and I think
see that a lot.
Yeah, and it's just back to that harsh reality or reminder that some may not want to hear, which is, you are in control of this project.
Yep.
You may not feel like it, and I understand why a lot of organizations feel like they're not, because the vendors in SIs, especially the bigger ones, tend to do a pretty good job of setting the tempo that they're comfortable with and setting the rules of the game that they want and that they're comfortable with, and they do it with such confidence and aggression and whatever. And it's coming from a place of experience in many cases, but oftentimes it's not a good thing just to go or to not slow down, especially early on. If you're early in the project and the SI and the vendor is sending resources your way right away, something's probably wrong. You're probably not ready for that, especially if you don't have your team mobilized, you don't have your plan in place. The vendor may have their plan, but you've got all this other stuff you've got to deal with, like data migration and change management and project governance, the overall PMO, all kinds of stuff that generally is outside the scope of the vendor. But if you don't have that stuff in place, it doesn't matter if the vendor showed up early. It's still going to create problems.
Yeah, it's a lot of organizations don't have patience for this, but it's a good idea to do kind of a readiness assessment before you launch one of these things. And what you're really looking for there is what are gaps in our readiness, the kind of things Lynette's probably thinking of. Do we have data hygiene issues, right, that we really ought to address because they're going to complicate things? Do we have current processes documented? Because the vendor is going to ask for those, right? And it's going to slow things down if you don't have them. Do we have broken integrations? Do we have really obsolete technology we've got to think about disposing of in some fashion? Taking some time to honestly look around the organization and kind of fill in those potholes before embarking on one of these large initiatives is a good idea.
Yeah. I totally agree. What about, so when these projects fail, and again, we're not just talking about litigation or lawsuits here, but just in general, when projects have difficulties and pain points, how much of it do you think is related to the technology versus more operational, organizational types of issues?
It's almost never the software, actually. We had one case I remember where the software simply couldn't do things the provider claimed it could do. It just couldn't. It was new. It was a new variant of an existing product. In my opinion, it just wasn't ready for market yet, and it was salesmanship kind of shoved it out the door. That's not typical, though. Even when the failures that we see are really technical in nature, that failure always results from some human element, right? A bad configuration or an error or maybe even a bad decision just to pick that product in the first place. Now, to be fair, we've also seen more often cases of genuine incompetence from integrators. That isn't typical, but we have seen extreme cases of genuine incompetence, unqualified staff. I've harped on this point a lot, but failure to understand mission critical business requirements of the organization, really bad testing practices, really bad governance practices, even occasionally, and this is not typical, a genuinely unethical behavior. But we also see cases of maybe even more often than this, where the primary fault for the failure really lies with the client. It's a failure to uphold their responsibilities to the project, making delays in decision-making, relitigating decisions that were already made, right, is debilitating to a project. And even in a couple of extreme cases, some genuinely unethical and abusive behavior. Those things do happen. They aren't normal, but we do see those. So to answer your question, it's almost never the software. These are things involving people, and complex things involving people are always messy.
Yeah. Humans are unpredictable. And
yeah,
two, no software is ever going to be perfect, but let's just say best case scenario, you find a software that can do 80 to 90% of what you want or expect it to do. It's that 10 to 20% of what it doesn't do. That's not necessarily a flaw with the software. It just, for whatever reason, doesn't work the way your business works, which is understandable because every business has its own nuances. But the question then becomes, what do you do with that 10 or 20% that it's not a fit for? And it's usually not, it's usually not to try and force fit the technology into a situation where it's not meant to work. You might need a third-party bolt-on. You might need to customize. You might need to have a manual process, whatever it is. But I think the exception or the caveat I would throw out to what you just said is it can be the technology when you try to force it to do something it was never meant to do. But again, that's not really a flaw or the fault of the software necessarily.
Right.
The organizational the way the organization addresses those flaws.
Yeah, it's just a machine. It just does what it's told, right? It's not its fault. But that 10 or 20% you mentioned, that's the kind of thing that, we do software selections. We're trying to tease out, I think. That 10 or 20% can be idiosyncratic things the customer does that are really important to them and their particular business. They also could be kind of odd things they could redesign, right? They're legacies of old systems and old practices. But you need to take a look at those things. You can't ignore them. And it really, that strange thing they seem to do. And we've seen some cases like that where customers do some things that look odd from the outside, and you never predict that was necessary, but it actually is. It's actually core to their operating model.
Yeah.
You want to tease those things out early.
Yeah, and one of the you mentioned earlier, you talked about fit to standard earlier, and that's a common blind spot that covers what you just said. It hides or masks what you just said. We should try to draw out in that. A lot of times vendors use as a selling point, we've got best practices, standard software. If you can't figure out how to make the software work for your business, then maybe you're the problem, not the software. And so they sort of gaslight you into thinking, okay, I have to somehow figure out how this software is going to fit my business. Otherwise I'm the problem. And, you almost like clients end up trying to prove that they're capable, when in reality, it's like that software just wasn't meant. It just doesn't fit your business. Just let it go. It's okay.
Right.
Don't just try to force it into this situation. And I think that's where a lot of companies get into trouble, and they fall prey to that sales message of, we have best practices. We know better somehow because we're the software vendor that has, tens of thousands of customers or whatever. And that's not necessarily true.
But yeah, you have to ask, whose standard is this exactly? Right?
Yeah.
Who decided this was the best practice? Exactly. Yeah. And, I'm probably unreasonably cynical about this particular topic, but, to me, it often means best practice means how our software already works.
Yeah.
And there's something deficient about you as a customer that you're unwilling to change your operating model or discard these things that don't fit. And clients do fall prey to that. I think it's intimidating.
Yeah. I've had many times have I had a debate with software vendors about whether or not best practices really exist. But to your point, the cynical side of me too wonders the same thing. Is there some sort of international governing body that we don't know about? That's the International Association of Industry Best Practices, and they determine what best practices are. Obviously, I'm being facetious when I say that. That doesn't exist, but every vendor says they have best practices. And then you start to think, well, okay, if every vendor has best practices, does that mean all the vendors work the same? And that's not true either. So
it must be identical, right?
They must be identical, right? And if you turn it around on a vendor, they'll say, no, of course not. Our software is better. Well, how is it better if it's all best practice, right? You're all saying best practice. But I think if you really peel back that onion, I think you start to realize there is no such thing as best practices. But that's we could have a whole nother podcast just on that one topic.
Yeah, outside of genuine regulatory requirements. They're style questions, really.
Yeah, exactly. Frank agrees with something we're saying. I'm not sure which part, but he said great point. So thank you for whichever point.
Appreciate that, Frank. Whatever it was, we appreciate
whatever it was. We hope we were adding some insight, maybe even some entertainment and humor to your day. We're hoping for it here today. Here's a really interesting question from, well, actually, let me get to this comment first before I get to the question. Don on LinkedIn says, failing ERP, there's a lot to do to repair stakeholders' trust. And that's something, this is a really good point, because a lot of times companies it doesn't even cross the mind of leaders when they get into these projects. They don't even think like what not only the financial implications are of a failure, but like, how does it affect your morale? How does it affect your long-term employee experience? There's so many things that get damaged. There's so much collateral damage from these that go well beyond just the stuff that gets argued in court. There's all this other collateral damage as it relates to morale and people. Have you seen that as well?
Absolutely. We see that in a lot of organizations because we do a lot of project recoveries where we're brought in to try to get them on track. And it's not uncommon. The organization has already been through a failure, or this one's been going on a long time before they had someone intercede in it. These things are debilitating to organizations if they're not done properly. And Don's absolutely right. The stakeholder trust, the exhaustion and fatigue and cynicism that sets in the organization, is very, very hard to recover from. It's just we sometimes see organizations and the client will behave in certain ways that we weren't expecting. And it turns out there's a reason for that. It's a legacy of some awful experience they went through with a consulting firm or an implementation project 5, 8, 10 years ago. And there's still echoes of it in the organization.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And, and then when you try to reboot or do it again, get the project going again, people doubt the ability of the organization to do it, which that right there, you're starting off at a disadvantage because people are already questioning, the path forward.
Yep. Everybody's tired. And there's a tendency to, when you've been in one of these things for 3 or 4 years and it's struggling and it seems like it's never going to end, people are already tired. If it really fails and you need a different solution or even revert back to an old one, people are exhausted at that point. And there's a tendency to just pick another one and go. Right. Yeah. And you got to give people time to heal.
Yeah. And a lot of times when you look at these projects or these failures, you could drop in or insert any vendor name and the same thing would have happened.
Absolutely.
A lot of times you say, well, it's because we try to implement SAP or it's because we try to implement Microsoft or whatever. Yeah. Maybe I'm sure there were complications or challenges with the technology, but to your point, it's usually not because of the software. It's usually the way you're running the project. That's the problem. It's more of a systemic failure, not a software failure per se.
Yep, absolutely. Doesn't almost. You're right. It really does not matter what the brand name was on the software on a lot of these cases. Yeah.
Yeah, I had one. This is a long time ago. This is actually the very first expert witness case I did. It was waste. It was waste management versus SAP, and this, I don't know, 2007 or 2008, I think it was, when that litigation was happening. But they had tried to implement. It was an SAP failure that was the litigation, but they had tried to implement PeopleSoft, I think it was, prior to that. And they had a big, massive PeopleSoft failure. And then they cut ties with PeopleSoft and then went to SAP and the same thing, very similar pattern. And we, I don't know if I ever shared the story with you, but in the case, we tried to, because this was before your time at the third stage, we, in the case, we tried to show in our report, we showed that there was a systemic pattern that repeated itself in the two implementations, the PeopleSoft and the SAP. And the whole point was, it was the way the project was managed that was the real root cause. Unfortunately, the judge threw out the part of our report that talked about the previous failure because he said you can't bring that into, he basically ruled that couldn't be admissible into the case involving SAP.
I see.
You had to keep it separate. So they end up striking that from the report and it wasn't usable in litigation. But I still obviously then and still do think that was a pattern that, you saw a lot of the same mistakes repeated. You just inserted a new vendor name and it hoped for better results, but you got the same exact result. So that's just an early lesson for that from one of the expert witness cases we did. That we get a reminder of that. Here's a question I want to get to from Darian on LinkedIn. Where is it? Oh, Darian asks on LinkedIn, if you could force one mandatory checkpoint into every ERP implementation, where would it be and what would need to be true before moving forward? I guess, first of all, would it be one or maybe I'll make it a little bit easier, one or more checkpoints? Is there one certain point or points where you would want to see that checkpoint?
Yeah. I think Darian made the question kind of more fun and interesting by making us pick one, right? One of my pet peeves is compromising integration testing standards. If the statement of work is well written, it's going to have preconditions for entry into integration tests, and it's going to have standards for how the integration test is going to be conducted. So it's going to say things like, we've got this stuff done, and it's ready to go, and we're in a position where we're going to let client stakeholders drive the testing, let's say, which is good practice, right? And then we often see under pressure when by the time you get to the first integration test that these things kind of get compromised. Now we said we'd have the integrations done to the ancillary systems. We kind of don't yet. And so we're going to fake that. right? By plugging data in to make processes go end to end. And, we don't really trust. There's too many bugs and things aren't connected yet. So actually the integrator is going to drive the testing and you guys can just watch, right? And so that's the first one. I put in.
Right.
Number one, you don't get to go any further. If you published an entry criteria into SIT, and you haven't met them, stop.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think we have a client right now that's going through something very similar. They're at the second round of the conference room pilots and didn't get through all the stuff. Stuff didn't pass the conference room pilot phase as it should have. And they're debating now, do we just go ahead and move into the third round, or do we get this right first before we move on? And of course, there's pressure to just move on, right? Because it in some ways you think, well, why slow things down? We could just keep going. And you have to look at, short term, that is going to save some time, but long term, what's that going to do? And usually the long term implications outweigh the short term.
Usually by the time you get to that point, also the planning is really not very realistic, right? You go into a compromised SIT knowing there's a backlog of things that need to be addressed. So you go in and behind, you're behind by a couple touchdowns already, right? And then you do the SIT in some fashion and stuff comes out of it, other things to address. And you go ahead and schedule the next SIT for 3 weeks later. How do you know? Right? You've got things you've got to address. They came out of the SIT and you came into it with baggage, right? So usually there's an unrealistic assessment of how much time we're going to need to make things right to get to the next stage gate. But I think that's sort of a cultural thing in our industry in general, right? Engineers tend to be fairly optimistic. And we always think we're 90% done, even if we're 90% done for 6 months. We always think we're 90% done.
Right. Yeah. Or you downplay the risk because you feel like I can handle the risk.
Yeah, sure. What is work overtime? We'll do it. We'll get it done. If things go just perfectly, right, everything will be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. If I apply enough brute force to it, it's gonna be okay.
Yeah.
Good points here. There's a lot of good questions coming in here. Someone on LinkedIn, I don't see the name of the person, but someone said, agree, best practices is an illusion.
Whoever said that, we should hire him.
I know. Yeah. Thank you. At least someone agrees with us. That's one of the most controversial things that I feel like I say is that best practices are a hoax or they're fake. And man, vendors, it's a trigger. It's a trigger for me, but it's also a trigger for vendors when I say it. So I'm surprised I'm not triggering more people. Maybe I am, and they're just being quiet. They're quietly triggered. Here's a question from Ed on LinkedIn. He says, hello from Washington State. How transparent should leadership be about program issues to maintain credibility without causing panic? What are your thoughts there?
I've got a bias toward transparency in this. You're not fooling anybody, right? We've seen that control of bad news and so forth. When it comes out, and it's worse, a lot worse, because there's been a break in trust. Sure, there are going to be people in your organization who are going to use project issues that are communicated to them as an excuse for the rumor mill and so on. That happens. But by and large, I think it's better to, I think people will respond positively to the transparency if they think they're being communicated with openly and there's a realistic plan to address whatever the deficiency is. So my bias would be toward transparency.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's no harm in it. And I think people would rather see that you're aware of the risk rather than downplaying it or putting up green status reports, every day saying how great everything is. And people, you're right. You're not fooling anyone. People know.
Yeah. They already know.
Yeah. And if they don't now, they're going to find out.
Right. It's going to be bad when they do. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Here's another question. I know we're a little bit over. I'll take one more audience question here. This is from YouTube. ZDAX PR says, some companies appoint data scientists to lead and supervise digital transformation. Under what conditions would it be preferable to hiring someone different with a different background? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, that's interesting. Data science to lead or supervise digital transformation. Well, I'm gonna have to read into the question some. I think The trickiest bit of digital transformation tends to be data oriented, right? We all know that almost certainly the data in your legacy system is corrupt in some fashion, right? Not perfect, at least. And it's really painful to figure that out and clean it up. And data conversion tends to be something that literally never goes very well in these things and requires a tremendous amount of effort. So maybe that's what the question is referring to. But the second part of the question, I'm not sure I understand. A different background from being a data scientist? Is that the question?
Well, I think it's more like, is there a different type of skill set that is appropriate for someone leading so in other words, would you want someone from the business? Would you want like either a broader technical person and or a business leader being the one to manage a digital transformation? Like what skills should, maybe we could broaden the question to what skills are important to a leader of digital transformation.
You've had a lot more experience than I have running PMOs for these sorts of things, but my instinct is always to pair them up, to have somebody who understands how to do these things, these complicated technical implementations, but has sympathy for the business, right? Sensitivity to business concerns. And then pair them up with somebody who's broadly knowledgeable about the business, understands the different constituencies and how they operate, but also has an appreciation for just how difficult these things are as technical enterprises.
Yeah, I agree. I think, the problem if you get someone who's just a data scientist, and not to downplay the importance of being a data scientist, but if that is your main area of focus and you don't fully understand business trade-offs and business implications, that can be a blind spot. But having said that, oftentimes if you get a business person who really understands the business, they may not understand the technical implementation. So I think your point is well taken as far as combining it. If you can get you need a combination of both. It's just a matter of how are you going to set up the leadership structure to where you don't have too many cooks in the kitchen or too many decision makers that lead to no decision.
Right.
So good stuff there. Well, good. So just to put a bow on all this, or to bring it all full circle, if you had to give advice to CEOs, board members, leadership teams, project team members, one piece of advice before they approve an ERP investment, before they get started on an implementation, what would that one thing be that would be most likely to reduce risk of failure?
I think it would be to be honest with yourself about your capacity for really doing this, right? And why you're doing it. Be honest with yourself about how you're going to accommodate the fact that your best people are going to be occupied with this project probably for a period of years. And then plan your course accordingly, the pace of the implementation accordingly. And then the next step to that is, since you're going to be hiring an integrator to help you with this, hire integrators for cultural fit with your organization, empathy with your organization, who are going to honor the pace at which you think you need to go, rather than trying to rush it. I guess that would be the number one thing I'd say.
Yeah, I agree with you. Actually, if you do that one thing, you're not going to solve all the world's problems, but you're going to solve a good chunk of them. Yeah. If you do it right, if you do what you're saying well, and if you do it right.
I got one other one too, and this is one we tell people a lot. We've talked about understanding the contract, right? That you're underneath. As an operations person, you're not going to relish doing that, right? But you've got inside counsel that can help you. So use them. But there are certain elements of the contract you really do need to understand. And we've talked about the need to raise your hand early if you're uncomfortable as a customer, right? Trust your instincts. If things don't feel right, you're probably correct, right? The things aren't on. And there are probably in your contract specified ways to protest, to raise a concern. So number one, do it, and don't wait till it's too late. Because as I said earlier, you're not going to get bonus points from opposing counsel for your patience and grace if things go really poorly. But also you have to do things in a certain specified manner if the contract calls for it. So just know what those things are. Your attorneys are going to like that and appreciate that you did that or diligent about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's a lot of the things you look for in a contract too aren't just they aren't just legal. It's not just legal terms and conditions. It's also the structural systemic things that affect the way software is deployed, it affects the implementation. So you need someone not only that understands the law, but someone who understands these implementations, because there's pieces that might be legally sound, but it's introducing risk to your implementation anyway. So I think knowing those things and getting guidance on that is important.
That's a really good caveat. We've seen situations where general counsel for a company reviews contracts, but they don't actually understand the implications of some of the things in the contract, because they're implications to how the project's going to be governed and executed, and they don't, that's not what they do, so they don't really understand that. So that's a really good point. You need more than one perspective in reviewing that contract. To that point, though, one thing to look for in a contract and make sure it's there is to have a defined escalation path if things go wrong.
Yeah.
It should be spelled out exactly what you're supposed to do, who exactly you're supposed to speak to.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. Well, thank you, Fred. Great conversation. And thank you to the audience for the great questions there as well. Appreciate all the good conversation. We've got a lot more to cover. We're going to build on some of the threads we just talked about with Fred, and we're also going to get into the conflict between business and IT within your organization and how you can reconcile those two differences of opinion. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground.
I'm Greg Benton. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with Third Stage Consulting. And if you are embarking on your digital transformation journey or in the middle of that journey in 2026, you're going to want to see our digital transformation report. This latest edition really dives into a lot of the key trends that we're seeing in the marketplace and the ecosystem right now. It also highlights a number of the things that are happening with AI being an important component and integral part of the ERP systems that are leading the way right now. Also, the shift toward composable and best-of-breed cloud solutions is really accelerating the decline of monolithic ERP replacement. The opportunity to download the report is found at thirdstage-consulting.com. And you'll also find other tools that will help you in the initiatives and the business planning that you're doing for 2026. Don't leave phase zero without it. Reach out today.
I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or free guide that we published. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management, or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you, or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 260. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. And Darian, we just had Fred on the show talking about our expert witness practice and some of our experience helping analyze lawsuits and failures for some big, massive, gnarly, complicated failures. What are some of your thoughts and takeaways from that conversation?
Yeah, a great conversation, of course. But one thing that really stood out to me was when you guys were talking about decision latency and how that can really be like a silent project killer, to summarize it, I guess. But one follow-up question I have with that is, which decisions tend to stall the longest and why?
Yeah, good question. I think one of the audience members commented about, or asked a question about decision-making around customization, what to do when there's customization, or how that can affect a project. I think a lot of times it's business process and workflow decisions. How do we want our business to work, and how do we want to build the software to support the business? Too often times organizations don't have a clear vision of what they want or expect out of technology. And so when it comes time to make the decision, they're paralyzed, and they either they take forever to make the decision, and or what's potentially even worse is the vendor decides for them. Well, this is the way I know how to build the software. This is the way I configured the software last time I implemented it for a client. So I'm just going to deploy it the same way for this client, which chances are pretty high that's not the right answer for you as an organization. So I think that's the dynamic at play there, is that if you don't have your processes in your future state mapped out clearly when you start the project, you're going to end up making those messy decisions in the middle of the project when the meter's running and the time's ticking.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing I want to touch on is just circling back to the tribal knowledge versus organizational reality. One question from when you work with clients, how much of businesses, I guess it's probably different for each one, still run on undocumented tribal knowledge a lot of the time?
It's a very large share of our clients are still just relying on what's in people's heads, or best case scenario, they might have some documentation, but it's 10 years old and it's, things have changed, but the documentation hasn't updated. So it's a good point, because that's a big part of the whole discovery and planning process, is really digging into and understanding how things operate today, getting stuff out of people's heads to understand how things operate today so that we can improve it to make it better for tomorrow. And what also happens that, a lot of companies fall victim to is they don't take the time or include in their scope the time to document processes and document decisions and document workflows. And they end up recreating that same problem. You've got all the consultants and team members that are here today making these decisions. So it's maybe not a big deal right now, but a year, 5 years, 10 years from now, when some of those people are gone or move into other roles or positions in the company, that knowledge goes with them. And so, taking the time to document is really important. So, and plus when you hire people, as you scale and grow as a company, you want to have that documentation to make it repeatable for more people as the company grows.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one last question. This is on the governance versus business judgment topic. Which issues should never be deferred regardless of pressure?
Well, I think, the decisions that should never be deferred are big showstopper types of business process operational decisions. So things that are core, fundamental to our business. I mean, it's the core competitive advantage we have as a company. It's our customers value it. It's really important to our customer base or our stakeholders if we're in the public sector. So having that clarity and making those decisions is really important. I mean, some of the smaller decisions, I suppose you could let slide, but if you're going to let one thing slide, I would say it should not be the major business process decisions.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, what a great conversation today with Fred. That was super amazing. And I think the audience really enjoyed it as well.
Yeah. They had great questions and comments there as well. So I appreciate all the good discussion. We're going to get into one more topic here today and shift gears a bit and talk about the conflict between business and IT. And we did dive into this a bit in the conversation with Fred, but we're going to dive into it in more detail here now. And that is understanding the competing priorities and competing areas of focus between your internal business operations and your internal IT department. There's a lot of trade-offs that need to be made in these big digital transformation projects. Sometimes when you simplify technology, you're complicating the business. Sometimes when you simplify the business, you're complicating technology, and sometimes it's a combination of both. And so the question becomes, well, how do we make those decisions? How do we, first of all, understand what those competing priorities are between internal business ops and internal IT ops? And then how do we as leaders then navigate those conflicts or those differences of opinion to make the decision that's best for the company? And it's easy to take a one-size-fits-all answer to some of these decisions, but the decisions that need to be made are typically pretty nuanced, and ultimately oftentimes leaders have to step in and make that decision, knowing that not everyone is unanimously going to agree on their own what the path forward should look like. So what we want to do is play you this clip from a YouTube video. It's a whiteboard video where I sketch out some of the differences between business and IT and what the competing priorities are. And then we'll talk about in that same video, we talk about how to address and navigate some of those conflicts. So let's roll the video and then we'll come back and chat about it. Now, the first difference and tension point that you see between IT and business is oftentimes the business is looking for flexibility. They want technology that can support their needs. They want, generally speaking, to be able to change
technology to support their business needs, whereas IT staff typically are looking at scalability and ease of use. And this is more from a technology perspective when I say ease of use. Obviously, you want ease of use from a business perspective too, but generally speaking, an IT department is going to try and simplify your technology stack, which is part of their job, to be fair, in their defense. Their job is to create a technical infrastructure that's highly scalable, that can grow with you as you grow as a business, and that is easier for the IT staff to manage. They don't want to overly complicate things with unnecessary technology or unnecessary difficulties within the technology stack. But when the business is looking at business flexibility, how can we change? How can we navigate evolving customer needs? How can we navigate evolving regulatory needs? How can we just change our business to be more competitive? They're looking at this more from a flexibility perspective. So what oftentimes happens is you'll have IT who might come in with more of a solution that's focused on cloud solutions, pre-configured best practices, lack of customization, or perhaps even zero customization, one single platform instead of multiple technologies. That, generally speaking, is what a lot of IT departments want, and it makes sense why they would want that. It's generally speaking going to be easier, more scalable. In some cases, it's less costly from a pure technology perspective. But again, on the business side of things, they might need flexibility. They might need to change the way standard software is built to be able to support their business, especially in areas that touch the customer, that are unique to their industry or their product, or unique to their competitive advantage. So oftentimes, these two things are in direct conflict, and it's up to leadership to figure out how to navigate these challenges. I'm going to come back to that point later in the video. Another tension we often see between IT and the business is that IT is oftentimes looking at things from a technical purity lens. In other words, they are very set on certain types of technologies. Generally speaking, I don't want to stereotype too much, but generally speaking, IT departments have a vision of what they think technology should look like. It could be a specific vendor. It might be that they want to be a Microsoft shop, or they want to be an SAP shop. It could be a type of technology. It could be that they're a cloud first type of IT department. It could be that they're an AI first or AI driven type of IT department. It could be that they have a general philosophy that they prescribe to. That could be something like single ERP system, or in some cases, some other organizations might go in with a custom development mentality first. Whatever the case may be, oftentimes IT departments start with the technology in mind first because that's what they're comfortable with, that's what they think is right from a technology perspective, but that doesn't always match and fit what the business needs. So on the surface, the business doesn't necessarily care about whether you're in the cloud or whether you use a certain product. Sometimes they do, but usually business users, business leaders are more focused on just general business needs. What is it we need the technology to do? And then we'll find the technology to support that. And again, oftentimes this is very much in conflict because, again, looking at the single ERP model, if your technology department, your IT department is looking at things through an ERP first lens, your business might say, well, ERP limits our flexibility. If we had a best of breed model or a composable ERP model, that's going to give us maximum flexibility, but it's going to make IT's job harder because now they've got multiple systems they have to manage. So the $1 million question becomes, whose needs are more important? The need for technical purity and what IT thinks is right from a technical perspective, or the needs of the business who's looking at things from operations and the aspects of what they need to run their business. Now, one thing I'll add here, one caveat, and just to preempt any objections that IT types might have here, sometimes people will say, well, business needs aren't necessarily business needs. It could be just a situation where the business is resisting changing because they've always done things a certain way and they don't want to deploy new technology because it's different from what they do today. That does sometimes happen, but more often than not, when you really dig into what the business needs, from a leadership perspective, they know what they need and they know what they want the organization to be able to support. And sometimes, yes, there's resistance to change buried within that, but more often than not, we find that the business needs actually are legitimate and they're more often than not in conflict with the technical purity that IT team members are oftentimes pursuing. Now, another broad generalization that isn't always true, and at the risk of stereotyping IT types, is that IT staff is more likely to be focused on cutting edge technology. These are the guys and gals within your organization that are up to date on the newest, latest, and greatest technologies. They know what the emerging trends are. They're probably pretty excited about some of these emerging trends. And to be fair, that's their job. Their job is to push the organization toward the cutting edge of IT and pushing the organization toward technology that can make the business better. So while your IT department might be focused on cutting edge technologies and finding the most modern, most recent technology to support your business, if you're a business leader, you're simply looking at, does the technology work and does it work for your business? So you're looking for tech that works. And this is a big point of conflict and a big point of contention we see a lot with organizations, because when you look at something as simple as, do we go from our legacy on-premise system to a cloud-based version of that system, the newer cloud-based version of that same system, your IT department's probably going to be more excited about that than your business, especially if business leaders find that your legacy on-premise system works just fine. It may be that they're trading off some of those competencies they already have. They might actually be taking a step back in some areas with more cutting-edge technology, because again, it might be more technically pure, it might be more technically advanced, but in many cases, we see that the more advanced technology actually from a business and functional perspective doesn't work as well as some of the older technologies. So again, this is another point of contention, another point where you see tension between business and IT. Now, another interesting finance and balance sheet related situation we see, or tension point we see between business and IT, is that IT is oftentimes more focused on operating expenditures. They're focused on things like cloud solutions, more subscription-based pricing, which becomes an annual operating cost rather than an asset that can be depreciated. Whereas business leaders, especially those that are in asset-intensive industries like manufacturing or utilities or any sort of field service-based organization where there's assets that are very expensive and need to be depreciated, need to be maintained, they're more operating from a capital expenditure perspective, and they're looking at things from a positive perspective. How can we depreciate assets and how can we sweat the assets? Now, IT, on the other hand, isn't looking to sweat the assets. They're looking to implement new technologies, which oftentimes shifts more of the cost from capital expenditure to operating expenditure. Now, again, broad generalization, not always true, but oftentimes these two things are in conflict. And this is where the CFO and other business leaders have to make that tough decision of which is more important from a finance and a balance sheet perspective. And then finally, if we look at just technology in general and the types of technology we deploy, IT departments care deeply about the type of tech that is being deployed. They want it to be a certain type of technology, a certain vendor, a certain type of category, a certain philosophy around how technology gets deployed. And that's why you hire these people. So they care deeply about technology. And generally speaking, business leaders don't care about technology. They're not hung up on, are we in the cloud or not? Or are we using SAP, or is it Microsoft, or is it Oracle or Workday or Salesforce? They're not hung up on that. They just want to know that the technology works and that it's going to support their business. So this right here creates tension as well, because again, you've got people that are oftentimes leading with technology versus people that are leading with business. And those two things come in conflict, direct conflict along the way. Now, what do you do about it? You know there's a conflict here. You know that each of these categories provides challenges and situations that need to be resolved. And this is where strong leadership and strong support from the executive level comes into play. If you don't have strong leadership, you're not going to be able to resolve these conflicts. You're going to be in constant battle over these dimensions here. And it's going to extend any sort of digital transformation, no matter how well planned it is or how solid the technology is or how well you've planned your business processes. You're going to run into friction and tension and headwinds because of these conflicts between business and IT. And this is where leadership, strong leadership, needs to step in and say, this is what's more important to us as an organization. This is how all these things tie into our higher level corporate strategy and objectives. And this is how it translates into what we're going to do from a business and technology perspective as part of this change initiative. Too oftentimes, though, what happens is leaders will step aside, delegate these decisions down to the project team, and they fight it out and battle it out amongst themselves. Or what also happens oftentimes is that if the CIO is the project sponsor, oftentimes they'll lead with and side with the technology priorities, and oftentimes they'll let these business needs fall by the wayside. This group ends up resisting the changes, being resentful about the changes that they weren't involved with or didn't agree with, and it creates a whole host of change management issues. So that's why you don't want just one leader making the decision. You want an executive steering committee that's well balanced across business and IT, and you want to make sure that they're deliberate about how they make these decisions and make sure that it aligns with their overall corporate strategy.
So that was the video from my YouTube channel about the internal conflict between business and IT. I'd be curious to hear from the audience, first of all, if any of this resonates with you. Did any of that sound familiar? Do you see any of that unfolding in your business or your situation right now? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. But what were your thoughts, Darian, after seeing that video?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that stood out for me. One, business and IT want different things a lot of the time. So business leaders prioritize flexibility and outcomes versus IT can prioritize scalability, simplicity, and technology purity. And the goals there can often collide, which I found super interesting. One follow-up question I have with that topic specifically is, when should businesses' needs outweigh technical simplicity?
Yeah, great question. And that is a $1 million question for a lot of companies. And, just to reframe it, use an example, a lot of times companies will say, we're a Microsoft shop or we're an SAP shop. And so we're going to lead with that platform or that tech stack first. If we can find a way to use Microsoft products because we're already a Microsoft shop, for example, we're gonna go Microsoft first. And that is the easy answer from a technical perspective, because there's less I have to manage. If I already understand and familiar with Microsoft, it makes it easier from an IT perspective. But if it creates issues on the business side, then someone's got to decide, is that business need worth the technical complexity or the pain that it might cause IT? And IT people would probably strongly resist the idea of moving outside of the Microsoft platform or whatever preferred platform they might have. But you may have to do it in the name of a broader business need. But I think the key is to recognize what is actually a broader business need. And I think that's what you're asking, is how do I know if I really do have a legitimate business need, or is this just the case of someone maybe resisting change or not being open to other ways of doing business? And there's a really fine line there between resistance to change and actual real business need. And a lot of times companies think that it's all or nothing. It's either I'm just going to defer to the software and the way it was built, or I'm going to customize the software to fit my business. Usually it's a hybrid. Usually companies end up doing a bit of both, but the key is to have the right governance in place to make those decisions. And so what I would say is, anything that has to do with the way you service your customers and makes you better and more effective than your competitors, that would be a good candidate for potential technical complication, and for lack of a better word. If it means that I can preserve or even build on a competitive advantage I have, then yes, I'm willing to take on technical complexity, maybe a subpar technical solution, knowing that it's a superior business outcome that I'm going to get out of it. And ideally, in a perfect world, you'd get both. You'd get the technology that the IT group wants and the business outcome that the business wants, but rarely does that happen 100% of the time. In fact, it never does. So every organization is faced with that decision at some point. But the key is to look at real business value. Like, is this giving us real business value? Is it making us different? And is there really not a way we could do that well with this simpler IT solution? And if the answer to any of those questions is no, we can't get what we need out of that technology, then it probably is valid to then go a direction that might introduce technical complexity, but it's in the name of providing more business value and business outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. My other thing that I really liked about the video was when you were talking about technology first thinking and how that can create a lot of risk. And with that, IT often start with preferred platform or architectures, while the business starts with operational needs. My question on this is, what is the earliest sign that technology is driving decisions instead of strategy?
Anytime you hear the word software best practices, that usually means that you're leading or deferring too much to the software. I think it's safe to set aside the word best practice as just a marketing spin that means very little. Now, of course, there are regulatory. We talked about this in the segment with Fred too earlier in this podcast. But there are cases where there's regulatory standards that you just have to do things a certain way to be compliant for regulatory purposes. But setting that aside, when you look at just the core of how you're your business operates otherwise. There's just so many nuances between different companies and different ways that they operate. And that's how they've given themselves a competitive advantage. And that's how they succeed in the market. So anytime you say, I'm just going to follow best practices and use the software out of the box the way it was built, that may be true for parts of your business, but there's going to be parts of your business where you don't want that to be true. You want to lead with a business and hope that technology fits. And if it doesn't fit, you're not going to force the technology to fit in a place where maybe it wasn't meant to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what a great topic. That video was super helpful, I'm sure, for a lot of people, and I found it super interesting.
Oh, good. Glad you liked it. Hope the audience liked it. I'd love to hear from the audience too. If you've seen any of those dynamics at play as it relates to the conflict between business and IT, and maybe what you did to overcome it, or what the outcome was from that conflict. I'd love to hear your feedback on that as well. So thank you for another great episode, Darian. Thank you to the audience for such great questions. Thanks to Fred Hessler for being here and being our guest on the show today. You can find new episodes every Wednesday, new episodes of this podcast every Wednesday, transformationgroundcontrol.com. Be sure to reach out to me if you'd like to chat about your project or discuss how Third Stage might be able to help you navigate your transformation efforts. I've included my contact information below if you'd like to reach out. So I hope you have a great week. We'll see you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care.
Ground control is made its own.